Thanks. Good afternoon. It is my honor to introduce our guest speaker today, the Honorable Justice Willis Whichard. In keeping with his steadfast demeanor of quiet strength, our graduate speaker today has earned, through service on the North Carolina Supreme Court, the honorific of Justice, as in Justice Willis Whichard. But our speaker today prefers to be called more simply Judge Whichard. Judge Whichard was born and raised in Durham, next door about 8 miles from here. He went on to serve the North Carolina Court of Appeals and the North Carolina Supreme Court, and has been elected to serve in both the State House of Representatives and the State Senate. That makes him the only person in state history to serve on both appellate courts and in both houses of the General Assembly. He has also served as Dean of Law at Campbell University. Judge Whichard accomplished much of that due to the education he got here at Carolina, earning both his bachelor's degree and his law degree here. Allow me to point out some reasons why Judge Whichard is here today. His parents were teachers, and as such, they raised him right, putting him to work at the age of 10 delivering newspapers for the Durham Sun, where he earned a dime a week from every customer. He earned his own way to UNC with his newspaper and other summer job savings, as well as receiving a semesterly scholarship of $150. While at UNC, he was named to the Order of the Golden Fleece, and as such, he was often invited to UNC System President Bill Friday's home to discuss current events. Perhaps it was there that he learned that the great privilege of receiving an education at UNC comes with it a great responsibility to serve, as our graduates here today no doubt understand. Judge Whichard gives back to education. He is an active proponent of the Carolina Public Humanities program, which provides public lectures and seminars that nurture a deeper understanding of our history and culture. He is on the board of the North Carolina Public School Forum, championing education here in the state. He is also a member of our School of Education's Board of Visitors, where he holds us to high standards, because indeed it is our great privilege to educate all of you, and that comes with an equally great responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Judge Willis Whichard.
Thank you, Dean Green. So, you've passed your tests, completed your papers, and survived your exam periods. You have come here today as a consequence, considering yourselves ready to graduate. And then you get a commencement speaker who says, "No, sorry, I have one more question for you." How dare he? But here's the question, to be answered in your minds only. Which provision of the United States Constitution guarantees to every child in this country the right to a sound, basic education? Which provision in the United States Constitution guarantees to every child in this country the right to a sound, basic education? If you know the answer, you recognize this as a trick question. There is no such provision. The United States Constitution is a remarkable document. For 230 years, it has held us together as a people and given us rights and privileges largely unknown to humanity previously. But it does not address a subject this audience would consider very fundamental: the right to education. North Carolina is ahead of the country in this respect. Its Constitution explicitly guarantees the right to a free public education. Article 1, Section 15 provides the people have a right to the privilege of education, and it is the duty of the state to guard and maintain that right. Article 9, Section 2, paren 1, then directs the General Assembly to provide for a general and uniform system wherein equal opportunities shall be provided for all students. Rarely, though, are constitutional provisions self-implementing. Rights, however noble in concept, can ring hollow when unclaimed or unenforced. In the mid-1990s, that is what several North Carolina school districts said about this one. The fundamental right to an education, they contended in Leandro versus State of North Carolina, lacked substance unless every child, no matter where in the state the child resided, had equal educational opportunities. The state of North Carolina responded that the case presented non-justiciable political questions. An intermediate appellate court concluded the right is limited to one of equal access to the existing system of education and does not embrace a qualitative standard. The case, thus, it said, should have been dismissed. This was the posture in which the case arrived at the Supreme Court of North Carolina, on which I then sat. Our court disagreed. There is indeed, it said, qualitative content to the right. It is a right to a sound basic education. An education that does not serve the purpose of preparing students to participate and compete in the society in which they live and work, it elaborated, is devoid of substance and is constitutionally inadequate. The court appropriately recognized that the administration of the public schools of the state is best left to the legislative and executive branches of government. It nevertheless emphatically affirmed the duty of the judicial branch to grant declaratory relief if the other branches fail to fulfill their constitutional obligations. Over 2 decades have passed since the Supreme Court's ruling, and our courts still wrestle with its implementation. Recently, a court denied the State Board of Education's motion to dismiss it from the suit. The board, the court concluded, was not supervising and administering a public school system that complied with the state constitution as interpreted in Leandro. It found a record replete with evidence that the right there defined continues to be denied to hundreds of thousands of North Carolina children. The parties have since agreed to retain a consultant to advise them on how to fulfill the Leandro mandate. And the governor has established a commission charged with further definition and implementation of this fundamental right of every child in the state to a sound basic education. As noted, the dean of this school is a member, and we should thank him for his service and wish him and his colleagues well in this endeavor. More important for our purposes on this occasion, however, today, new recruits join the forces striving to implement this fundamental constitutional right. Legislators, governors, and judges have their place in this long struggle to fulfill our resolve that there should be no elite of the mind in this state and country, to achieve Governor Aycock's vision of the royal right of every child to have the opportunity to burgeon out all there is within him or her. But teachers are the indispensable frontline troops. The profession you enter today, or perhaps return to, is an ancient and learned one. As stated by the North Carolina Teachers Assembly in the late 19th century, the office of the teacher is as old as civilization. It was a forerunner of all the professions. It was before law, before statesmanship. Indeed, teaching was the soil out of which these grew. As graduates of this school, it now becomes your role to advance the vision of Archibald Murphy. A state senator from here in Orange County in the early 19th century, when North Carolina was known as the Rip Van Winkle state for its multifaceted backwardness, Murphy urged the state to develop its economy through internal improvements, and this, he rightly believed, would enable the requisite production of revenues to fund universal public education. Almost a decade later, the North Carolina General Assembly established a literary fund through which to begin setting aside money for public education. This, Governor David Swain would say, laid the foundation for a school system as extensive as our limits and as enduring as our prosperity, ultimately affording the blessings of universal public education to the state's children. Later, while president of this university, Swain would draft the plan for a public school system, and in 1840, we get the first public school in the state, at least in a nascent modern sense. The Civil War devastated much of the state's progress in public education, but the state had visionary leaders like Walter Hines Page, who now saw education not just as a means for the teaching of youth, but also for the building of a new social order. Educational reforms now bridged the transition from a plantation to a commercial economy. The classroom came to be viewed as the progenitor of a new culture and a new way of life. The state professionalized teacher training to serve the needs of the classroom revolution. It built new schoolhouses at an astonishing rate and developed an elaborate bureaucracy to administer the instruction of youth. The graded classroom, normative to us but controversial in its origins, replaced classrooms that contained children of all ages and greatly varying abilities. And far too much later, we move past the sad days of a racially segregated system to a time when the U.S. Supreme Court required that there be neither black schools nor white schools, but just schools. Throughout this history of reform and progress, education has been deemed to serve not just individual student purposes, but also societal ones. Even as the Civil War ravaged our country, the Illinois Superintendent of Schools declared that the chief end of education was to make good citizens. That has not changed, and it will not. We live in a STEM emphasis world. The importance of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics is beyond dispute. But so is the significance of the humanities. They are the heart and soul of our ability to sustain our democracy. And without a vibrant, well-functioning democracy, the technological advances and national security interests that the STEM courses sustain and promote are at considerable risk. I thus appeal to those of you who will teach and supervise teachers in the humanities. As you prepare your students to assume their proper roles in a 21st century American democracy, it is essential that they develop informed perspectives on politics and political participation. I recognize that I am using words with a discordant ring these days to many people, but that should not be the case. Properly understood and applied, politics is just what we do together in the absence of tyranny or aristocracy. As in the days of Washington or Jefferson, Lincoln or Kennedy, human experience and human aspirations are the materials of politics, and reasoned argument and honorable compromise are the civilized ways of conducting politics. The term in itself is neither good nor bad. Political activity is simply necessary to order our lives together in society, and politics and the governments produced from political activity are what we make them. Václav Havel, the Czech statesman and writer, has an eloquent word on this subject for you as teachers. Let us teach both ourselves and others, Havel has said, that politics does not have to be the art of the possible, especially if this means the art of speculating, calculating, intrigues, secret agreements, and pragmatic maneuvering. But it can also be the art of the impossible. That is, the art of making both ourselves and the world better. In his farewell address when leaving the United States Senate, Frank Porter Graham, one of my father's favorite teachers in this university, spoke of an America of our struggles and hopes, in which the least of these, our brethren, has the freedom to struggle for freedom, where the answer to error is not terror, the respect for the past is not reaction, and the hope for the future is not revolution, where the integrity of simple people is beyond price, and the daily toil of millions is above pomp and power, where the majority is without tyranny, and the minority without fear, and all people have hope. I commend those aspirations to you as you leave this grand old place to prepare our future leaders and the voters who will elect them and hopefully hold them accountable. I deviate once more from the notion that you've taken your last exam. I have one more question for you. Not for a school exam, but for the exam of life. It is the question posed to Mitch Albom by his favorite teacher, Maury Schwartz. Are you trying to be as human as you can be? Are you trying to be as human as you can be? Whatever your teaching area, your ultimate subject, like Maury's, will be the meaning of life. You will teach that, as he did from experience, your own and that of historical and literary figures on whom you will draw in your classrooms. In so doing, you will enhance your students' humanity, and in the process, you will enhance your own. Robert Kennedy is among the historical figures on whom you might draw. In addressing an audience in South Africa in 1966, Kennedy said this: "It is from numberless acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a man or woman stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he or she sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. As teachers, you will be among those sending forth these tiny ripples of hope that build those larger and more impactful currents. Among the literary figures on whom you might draw is the modern American novelist and poet Wendell Berry. In Berry's poem, Rising, he notes that any man's or woman's death could end the story. He proceeds, though, to say, there is a grave too in each survivor. By it, the dead one lives. He or she enters us a broken blade, sharp, clear as a lens or mirror. As teachers, you will live on a broken blade, sharp, clear as a lens or mirror in your students, and through them in many others. A teacher affects eternity, Henry Adams said. He or she can never tell where his or her influence stops. So do you see now why I said in your hands, above all others, rests the implementation of the constitutional aspiration or right of every child to a sound basic education? My final word to you on this significant occasion, thus, is not a question, but an order from the judge. Never, ever forget how important you are to the students you teach, and through them to the larger community, the state, the country, and the world. Thanks for inviting me to share this occasion with you. Congratulations and all the best.